Hello, my name's Gemma Simmons, and I'm a sister of the Congregation of Jesus and director of the Religious Life Institute in Cambridge. Outside my window, spring is trying very hard to emerge after some weeks of devastating weather. There are signs everywhere of the recent storms, with tree trunks and branches and even whole trees blown down. But quietly, underground, spring flowers have been pushing through. Fragile though they are, nothing can prevent that surge of new life from finding its way into the sun. I think you've probably seen enough of me, so I'm going to be sharing my screen with you and showing some slides, which are going to be much more interesting to have a look at. The word Lent means spring. Most people equate Lent with penance and fasting. They think of it as a gloomy time, all about sacrifice and giving up and going without. Shrove Tuesday is all fun and pancakes, while Ash Wednesday is all sackcloth and ashes. But if we continue with the gardening metaphor, Lent is about clearing the ground so that the new life can push its way through and find space to be lived to the full. Seen in that way, Lent is all about life irrepressible and unquenchable, that needs to be given space to become a powerful and unstoppable force. The story of religious life within the church works very much like this view of Lent. If we look at the history of religious life, it has a rhythm of birth and death and rebirth. From the desert hermits, monastic life was born. From monastic life, the mendicant life was born. From the mendicant life, the apostolic congregations of men and then of women were born, and so it goes on. There was no clear-cut moment when it became obvious to everyone what was going on. Birth is always a painful and messy business, and so, generally speaking, is death. The previous manifestations of religious life didn't die when a new form emerged, but they often changed and adapted as times and cultures changed. Sometimes they did disappear in one form, only for another form to re-emerge. In the story of my own congregation, this is made very clear in a series of paintings of the life of our foundress, Mary Ward, called The Painted Life. When Mary was born in 1585, religious life had ceased to exist in England after the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII, some 50 years before. Religious life was no more than a memory, and young girls like Mary and her cousin Barbara had never met a nun or seen a living monastery. But an elderly servant told them stories of monastic life, and those stories struck a spark, which for both of them brought to life a dream of giving their lives completely to God. The memory of one way of life now disappeared, inspired another way of life, newly emerging. 10 years later, they both set sail for France to begin a completely new form of religious life for women on the Jesuit model, unenclosed, apostolic, and forbidden by church law, which held that women on the loose meant loose women. It was a precarious new beginning for a small and unprotected group of women, but like the new life that has been dormant in winter, only waiting for spring to come, it began to spread and emerge all over Europe. New beginnings in the church aren't always welcome without question, and some 20 years later, all the houses of our congregation were suppressed, and Mary Ward was imprisoned on a charge of heresy. It must have seemed as if the dream died completely. Many of Mary's companions left to find safety elsewhere, but she and a small number remained together and continued to live this way of life faithfully. They believed that if it was of God, it couldn't die, and they were right. 400 years later, here we are, a congregation which has extended across the world to places Mary Ward had never heard of. Our way of life is ending in some places and finding new life in others, and that's the pattern of religious life. As I speak, two of our sisters have opened up the basement of their apartment block in Kiev, and turned it into a refuge for women and children sheltering from the bombing of their city. Another sister has gone to Slovakia, where she's working in a newly set up refugee camp on the border with Ukraine. Thousands of displaced families are pouring into the camp in desperate need. Mary Ward Sisters are there waiting to welcome and support them. In another part of the world, a Mary Ward sister is headmistress of a school in South Sudan. Life for the children there is precarious. There's often not enough to eat. The political situation around them is volatile and frequently violent. And there are few opportunities for children, especially girls, to make a life for themselves. The education they receive is a chance for them to make the best of the life force that is within them. Here in the global north, there's evidence all around us that religious life as we have known it has come to its conclusion. But I'm certain it's not dying, just as I'm certain every year that spring will come and that winter won't have the last word. There are still people being inspired by the Holy Spirit to give their lives to God, giving witness to the longings and values expressed through community life and the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Lent is a lean time, a time of going without, but above all, it's a time of preparing for new life to emerge from the old. In terms of religious life, I can't wait to see the flowers that are going to bloom.